The other day, I was scrolling through the newspaper online, and I stumbled across an article that talked about how Prince Harry and Duchess Meghan were sending out holiday cards that featured their 6-month-old daughter on them. And I thought it was a little curious that such a thing noted an article in the paper. But of course, we Americans are fascinated with the British royal family. I'm not entirely certain why this is so. After all, a couple of centuries ago, we fought a war that made sure we wouldn't have our own royal family. But we are fascinated with them. Just look at the attention Oprah's interview with Meghan and Harry drew, or the success of the Netflix series, The Crown. Of course, fascination with royalty is nothing new. Think of all the fairy tales that feature princes and princesses. The world has long been impressed by royalty. In the Bible, God is sometimes referred to as a king, as a ruler seated on the throne. Kings in ancient times were often warriors. They were images of strength and power. Kings in ancient times also often sat at the city gate and rendered judgments, and so they were thought of as rulers and judges. And so to speak of God as king is to speak of God as one with power, one with authority, one who judges and rules over all creation. And Jesus himself is spoken of as a king. When the angel Gabriel came to visit the Virgin Mary and to tell her that she would soon bear a son, he told her that this son she would name Jesus would sit on the throne of David, and of his kingdom there would be no end. Kings show up in our scripture reading for this morning. There is Augustus, the emperor of the Roman Empire, the vast Roman world. And then there's King David again, that most famous of Israel's kings. And then just for good measure, they throw in a powerful government official, Quirinius, the governor of Syria. All this talk of power and royalty. But Jesus' birth is far from the palace, about as unroyal as you can get. In fact, Jesus' little family is buffeted about by royal power. It is because of a royal decree that Mary and Joseph must travel, even though Mary is pregnant and due to give birth at any time. It is because of a royal power that Mary and Joseph find themselves in Bethlehem, far from home, with no place to stay. In popular thought, this has them end up in the barn, in the stable, with the animals. A lot of scholars think it's more likely that they stayed in a house, in the home of someone where it was already full from other travelers, and so the only place left was the room in the house where the animals were brought in at night. And so whichever way you picture it, it is far removed from royalty. It is not at all a royal birth. There are no servants in attendance. There's no royal nursery in which to place the baby. In fact, there's no place to put the baby at all. And so his mother places him in the feed trough. It's the only place she can find. There's no news coverage. The birth goes more or less unnoticed. There's no local news. There's no paparazzi there. By all appearances, this birth is the birth of one insignificant, anonymous, unimportant. There are visitors, however. Shepherds learn of the birth and come to see. Shepherds are the last people you would expect to be invited to the palace. Shepherds in first century Palestine were the lowest end of the spectrum. They were rough and calloused, hard-working sorts, the lowest of the low class, far from the creme de la creme of society. And if the story were told in our day, perhaps the baby Jesus would have been visited by migrant workers, or perhaps the cleaning crew from the local hotel. In some ways, the story bears some resemblance to other stories of heroes who arise from the most humble beginnings. Heroes who come from a log cabin birth, so to speak. But this story is about much more than humble beginnings. This story is about where God is to be found, where it is that God enters into the world. And when God enters into the world in Jesus, Jesus looks nothing like earthly kings, nothing like those who we think of as powerful. The God we meet in Jesus is more likely to be found in the homeless shelter than in the palace. The God we meet in Jesus is more likely to be found in the refugee camp than in the halls of power. The God we meet in Jesus is more likely to be found in the fields with the migrant workers than he is with the captains of industry. And dare I say it, the God we meet in Jesus is more likely to be found at a welcome table than he is at the fanciest worship service. You know, there are times when I struggle to find God, times when God seems distant, even absent. And I wonder if at such times I may be looking for God in the wrong places. Christ is born. God has come to dwell with her people. God has come to dwell in the midst of the weak, and the lowly, and the sinner, and the broken, and the poor, and the hungry. And the world will never be the same again. Thanks be to God.